All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Kuf Beis. We learned on Daf Kuf Aleph Amid Beis. First, we learned the Shita of Rabbi Yechanan that argued with the prior opinions of both Rav and Shmuel regarding Shinui Makom. Now, when a person eats a meal and then they have Hesach Hadas, which means that in their minds the meal is over. If they later change their minds and they want to continue to eat, even though they did not yet make a bracha achroina, but since they interrupted their first meal with a Hesach Hadas, they have to make a new bracha prior, a new bracha rishona. Question is, if a person changes one's location, mi bayis lebayis, mi cheder lecheder, is that in itself considered an interruption like Hesach Hadas? So we have that Rav and Shmuel says, yes, it does. Rabbi Yechanan says that Shinui Makom ein sarech levarich. And then we went ahead and we refuted the Shita of Rabbi Yechanan from a Braisa. Now, we had a machlokes Rab Chizda and Rab Sheshes regarding the following. Rab Chizda says, fine. Rabbi Yechanan made a categorical statement that a Shinui Makom, no matter from what type of food, is not considered the Hesach Hadas. That indeed is refuted. However, if a person is Mishana Makom, but they ate a type of food, Dvarim, Shetu'unim, Bracha La'achareim, B'Makoimon, meaning that if a person stood up from a meal and they left their current location, their original location, do they have to return to make a Bracha Achreina? And the answer is, it depends on what type of food did you eat. Now, indeed, what type of food demands for you to return to your original place? That also is a big machlokes rishonim. We are learning the Gemara and Rashbam. The Rashbam has what we can call perhaps the most chamurdika opinion, that any food, not only hamoitzi berchas hamazon, not only foods that are made from the 5 grains that demand an ala michya, but any food after which you have to make what we call a bracha me'ein gimel, whether it is a al ha'aretz, whether it is a al hagefen, you have to return to your original place. And now another nuance, if you are going to continue to eat in your new current location, okay, then there's another thing. You can always make the bracha achreina in your final current location because that is where you ate. So says Rab Chizda, when a person eats, let's say, meat, when a person drinks water and they leave their original location, since they are not obligated to return, nor are they obligated to continue to eat meat or water in their current location in order to be able to make a bracha achreina. That is where we say that moving location is indeed a ending of the meal, because nothing is connecting them to the meal. Not they have to return, nor do they have to eat more of that food type to make a bracha achreina. So therefore, enachanami, we refuted Rabbi Yechanan, who always said, Ein sarach levarech. In such a scenario, yes, you'll have to make a new bracha prior. However, says Rabbi Chizda, if you ate a food type that demands of you to return to your original location, which means that even though you stood up and you left, you didn't really finish. It's not a real ending of the meal because you have to either return, or if you won't return, you will have to continue to eat this food type and then make the bracha achreina in your new location. So that's not considered an interruption. It's not like a hesach hadas, and you don't have to make a new bracha prior. So holds Rab Chizda. Rab Sheshes says that echad zeh ve'echad zeh tzarich levarich. Makes no difference. That is the machlokes that we left off yesterday, and we learned a relatively lengthy braisa. The braisa uses the words that if chaverim, if people are sitting together and they uprooted themselves. The lashon in the Tana was they made it an akiras makom. Now this expression of uprooting themselves implies that they should not have left. That's the premise of the kash of the Gemara. Because if a person, let's say, ate meat, for which they are allowed to make a bracha achreina in another location, they can just walk out and make a bracha over there, then the Tana would never use the word that they were oik sha'akru b'mekayman. They didn't uproot themselves. Uprooting themselves means that you should have been there. You are bound to the original case. So l'chayda the Braisa is referring to scenarios where you ate foods that if you were to leave, generally you would have to return to your original location to make a bracha achrayna. And the Braisa added the following nuance, that if at least one member of the group that was eating in the original location remained in the original location, that is where the Braisa says when people return, they don't have to make a new bracha prior. Which means that if no one remained behind, if everyone left, even though they were justified to leave, they left for a mitzvah purpose, since everyone left, when they return, they have to make a new bracha prior. So that l'chayra is a clear kasha against Rab Chizda that holds that since you have to return to your original place, that in itself creates a continuation of the meal. It's not considered a finishing, a conclusion of the meal. And he says that you don't have to make a new bracha prior. That is where we left off. So we're going to go ahead and first of all, we're going to point out that really the machlokes between Rab Chizda and Rab Sheshes is a machlokes tanoim. And the Braisa that we quoted follows Rabbi Yehuda. And Rab Chizda will therefore have the right to subscribe to the Chachamim. Not only that, but based on the new Tanoim that we will introduce, Rabbi Yochanan now will be able to say that he's completely not refuted. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan was the one that said on top of Kuf Aleph Amid Beis that whenever you make a shinui makom, you never have to make a bracha. Rabbi Yochanan will explain that the Chachamim that Rabbi Chizda is leaning on says even more than what Rabbi Chizda is saying, and Rabbi Yochanan himself will remain standing. That will be the first part of today's daf. The second part of today's daf, we're going to learn three sugyas. We'll go back to the first thing that we learned about on Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph, or towards the middle of Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph, and that was the question of Peiros Mapo Umekadesh. And we learned, before we learned about Peiros Mapo Umekadesh, we learned the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi by Hafsaka. Right, you're eating Friday afternoon, comes on Shabbos. So we learned Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to bench. Rabbi Yossi holds you have to do nothing. You don't even have to make kiddush. You don't bench, you don't make kiddush. You began the meal Friday. Keep on eating. After, at the end, then make kiddush. There's a nuance about their machlokes that wasn't mentioned yesterday, an amazing nuance about the Seder of Kiddush and Birchas Hamazon, as we'll explain, and that will be learned today on that Kuf Beis. And then at the end of Kuf Beis, we're going to have a series of opinions as to what is the order when Yom Tov falls out on Motzei Shabbos, which is very common, especially in Chutz La'aretz. Right? It doesn't matter if the first day Yom Tov is on Shabbos also, which happens very often here, or whether Yom Tov begins on Sunday, like this year Pesach begins on Sunday. But whenever you leave Shabbos, you have to make Havdalah, right? Even though you're going into Yom Tov, what is the Seder of Yayin, of Kiddush, of Havdalah, of Zman, right? We are familiar with the Yak Nahaz because we paskin that way, which is an abbreviation for the Seder of what we say first. But that will be a hemshech. I missed one sugya, which will be, again, fascinating, whether a person is allowed to say two kedushos over one cup. And the Gemara is going to say that ein oimlim shtei kedushos al kais achas, which means that if you're doing two different type of mitzvahs, each one demands for you to hold a cup of wine, one may not use the same cup of wine unless you don't have any more wine. And we're going to learn that's the source why, for example, by Sheva Brachas nowadays, I don't know if you noticed, right? By all the Sheva Brachas, you have 2 cups of wine, one upon which whoever is leading the benching holds the cups, the kais of Birchas Hamazon, and then there's another cup. Really, on the other cup, you don't make 7 brachas, you make 6 brachas. Why don't you use the same cup? That's because of the rule we're going to learn today, that ein oimlim shtei kedushos al kais achas. One is connected to benching. One is connected to Sheva brachas. These are 2 different things. We're going to learn a Tosfos that's going to suggest maybe that's why under the chuppah we have 2 different cups. Birchas Erusin, Birchas Nesuyin. Now, we'll speak about Nenek Chabad, right? But we pour the wine again. We're going to learn about all of that and much more in today's daf. So, Nachamol, we left off, as a cliffhanger, we left off at the last line on daf Kuf Aleph Amid Beis. We had Rabbi Yochanan that was very broad. Whenever you make shinui makom, you never have to bench. Rabbi Yochanan was refuted. Then, as we spoke out, part of what Rabbi Yochanan says is substantiated. But then we had the Rabbi Chizda. Rabbi Chizda was the one that says that if you leave from eating a food that demands for you to return, that keeps you connected, and you don't have to make a new bracha prior. And the kasha against Rab Chizda was from the Braisa. That again, the words of the Braisa was that v'okru ragleim lotzeis l'kras chasan l'kras kala, which is mashma that they should not have left. And again, it must be if they were eating foods that don't demand their return, then they can leave. And you wouldn't say the words that they uprooted themselves. And nevertheless, the Braisa says that if no one remained behind, then clearly the Braisa says, then they have to make a new bracha prior. So Kasha Rab Chizda answers the Gemara, Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, Daf Kuf Beis, you understood the Braisa correctly. However, it's a machlokes tanoim. And Man Tana, who is the author of the Braisa of Akiros, which is the name of the Braisa that we just quoted, that is only the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. And as the Tanya, as we'll quote another Braisa, we'll see that the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda don't share the same opinion. And therefore, Rabbi Chizda and Amoida has the right to subscribe to the sheet of the Chachamim. Now, where do we have the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda? It's a similar case, the Tanya, Chaverim. We're speaking about people that are meticulous, both in the dinim of tithing produce properly and in the dinim of Tum and Tara, contrasting it, Bisman Bayesheni, with a group of Yidden that were not that meticulous, partially because they were not that learned, partially because they were not so medagdig b'mitzvahs, and it's a slippery slope. So if you have chaverim, shahoyim masulim that they were eating together, that's milsa agav urcha kamashmalan, that people are not always supposed to eat with hamaratzim. There are kashrus issues v'chulei. Or if you're eating with them, make sure that you're eating with them not as an equal, but you're there to be of a good influence on them. Anyways, this is not negeya here. If the chaverim are eating together, and here again the Braisa uses the words ve'okru ragleim. Again, this is a lashon that implies that they are eating foods for which, if they leave their current location, they must return to make an after bracha. With the only exception, as we mentioned, that if they continue to eat the same food type in a new location, then they can bench over there. Because you always have to bench in the place where you ate last. But if not for the continuation of eating, then you must return, which is why, since you must return, don't leave, bench first, which is why we use the words they uprooted themselves and they need a justification. Taka, who gave them the right to leave? Because they went to go to a Beis HaKnesses, or they went to go to a Beis HaMedrash, which justifies. There's a minyan, there's a shiur that's starting at a certain time. So says the Braisa that Kishehem Yoitzim, before they leave, that's how we touched. Ein tu'unim bracha lemafreya, they don't need to make a bracha achreina, because they will be allowed to come back and to continue to eat. And therefore, when they do return, they don't have to make a new bracha prior. And another nuance, I think it was Shlomo that pointed out, there's another qualification to that. If they were absent in the amount of time that food begins to digest, which is another whole topic in halacha, then you can't say that they can just continue to eat. But we're speaking about they will return within that time frame, then Shalom al Yisrael. And on that, Amar, now you have to add a yud. It's not Rav. This is a Braisa. By me, at least, it's written Rav. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Bamed Dvaram Amurim. Boom. Here you go, guys. The klal Bamed Dvaram Amurim means he argues, as the Rashbam reminds us. Right, we just had this in Eruvin Daf Pei Beis. That's the meaning of Bamed. He's not clarifying the Chachamim. He's arguing with the Chachamim. The Chachamim did not limit this halacha. Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says, do you know when the above is correct? Only that before they leave, they don't have to make a bracha achreina. And if they left without making a bracha achreina, when they return, they don't have to make a new bracha prior. That's only bisman sheni chusha mixas chavedim. If someone remained behind, mamish, exactly what we learned on Kuf Aleph Amid Beis. And therefore, since at least one is left behind, and even another detail, even if the one that was left behind didn't exactly choose to stay behind, he was an old man, he had no koyach to leave, doesn't matter. Someone of the group is left, so that's considered that the meal was not concluded. If no one is left behind, if the entire group went away, that in itself creates a conclusion to the meal, and therefore both dinim. Number one, kishehem yoitzim, before they leave, they have to make a bracha lemafreya, which means a bracha achreina, and whether they made the bracha achreina or not, whether they made it or not, they left, they have to make a bracha prior. And again, Shlomo, we spoke out to Tosfos, if they didn't make the bracha achreina when they return, they don't make a bracha achreina and a bracha prior. They make a bracha prior, And then they make one bracha achrayna for everything that they ate, for both eatings. Shitas Tosos. So what do we see over here? That's the beauty. Based on Rabbi Yehuda's Bamed Dvarim Amurim expression, that we know as a rule, he doesn't mean to clarify the prior opinion. He means to argue with the prior opinion. That means the Chachamim make no such differentiation. The Chachamim of this Braisa holds that even if no one was left behind, as long as the foods that they ate demand for their return, which is why the Chachamim use the words va'akru ragleim, they don't have to make a bracha prior. Now again, I just want to clarify that it's when we learned yesterday, and it says Rabbi Yechanan is not refuted, he's still partially refuted, because Rabbi Yechanan was the most lenient. Rabbi Yechanan on Kuf Aleph on the first line on Amud Beis, he says that whenever you change a location, you never have to make a new bracha prior. Rabbi Yechanan seemingly holds that, not seemingly, he holds that even if you ate something that doesn't demand for you to return, even when there is no Akiras Raglayim, that Lochayra is refuted. But at least Rav Chizda can say, I subscribe to the Chachamim. Says the Gemara, Ella Taima, this is the Chachamim. Only there is the Cheshehem Yoitzim. When people leave, first of all, they don't have to make right away a bracha achrayna, ein tunem bracha lamafreya, and uchashehem choizlim, ein tunem bracha lachatchila. Aval dvarim she'ein tunem bracha lachrayim. B'mekayman, but foods that will not demand for you to return if you left, which are foods according to the Rashbam that have a boirei nefashis as their bracha achrayna. Afilu l'Rabbanan, even according to the Chachamim, kishehem yoitzim, yes, they should make a bracha before they leave. Tunem bracha lamafreya. In other words, if they didn't make the bracha achrayna, they can make it wherever they're going to be, but really make it in your location. And uchashehem chayzrim, and if they didn't make the bracha achrayna, you can't say, well, I didn't make the bracha achrayna, so therefore why do I have to make another shahakar? No, uchashehem chayzrim to una bracha lachatchila, because at least over here, since when you left, nothing is connecting you to the meal, you don't have to return to the location. You don't even have to eat more in order to make a bracha achrayna in your new location. So that's called an interruption. So therefore it's like hesech hadas. So here again, lema to have it to yufta the Rabbi Yechanan, because Rabbi Yechanan holds against Rav and Shmuel that shinui makayim is never a reason for you to have to make a new bracha prior. Now the Gemara doesn't understand, why do we need to refute Rabbi Yechanan when we already refuted him yesterday? And truth be told, when we learned the Braisa yesterday, Rabbi Yechanan wasn't anymore fully refuted like we have right now. And now we see that Rabbi Chizda also says that in the scenarios where you ate Dvarim hatu'una bracha lachreim b'mekayimam, shini makim is not called a hefsek. But at least some of Rabbi Yechanan is already refuted. Rabbi Yechanan said that you never have to make a new bracha prior. So the Gemara is asking on this statement, why do we have to refute him from this new braisa? Was he already not refuted? So the Gemara says, I know that, but there are times that you want to quote various braisas to refute, especially Rabbi Yechanan. Is this braisa also a refutation? Nema maham nami tevet yufta? So now Rabbi Yechanan responds. It's amazing. Yesterday he was quiet. And now Rabbi Yechanan not only will not be partially refuted, Rabbi Yechanan now is going to actually he's going to resurrect his opinion. He's not refuted at all. Now that we learned the Braisa that we learned today on Kuf Beis, Amar Loch Rabbi Yechanan, that the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda that argue in the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, the Chachamim completely argue with Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim hold exactly what I am subscribing to. That hu adin dafilu devarim she'ein tu'unim bracha lachreim b'mekayim. When you eat foods, that if you leave without making a bracha achrayna, you don't have to return to its place. You don't have to eat more in your new place. Anything that demands a bite in the nefashis. Even in such a scenario, the Chachamim of the Braisa, Tanoim, will hold nami ein tzarech levarech. This is really the shita of the Chachamim, and I subscribe to their shita. The Braisa uses the words Vaha diktani akru ragleim. Akru ragleim is an expression used dafka regarding foods that does demand for you to return to the original location, which is why you are grounded in the original location, which is why we can use the words you uprooted yourself, Einachanami. The Braisa used those words, but that's only Lohoidiyacha Koichi de Rabbi Yehuda. That Rabbi Yehuda, who is the Machmer, the Afilu, Devarim, Shetu'unim, Bracha, Lachreim, B'Mekaimam. And here there's certainly B'Sfara less of a conclusion. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda has to say that the only reason why you would not have to make a new bracha prior is only the hinichu mixas chavedim. But aval lo hinichu mixas chavedim, then even though you ate foods that demand your return, kishehem yoitzim, yes, to unim bracha l'mafrei, you should make a bracha achrona first prior to leaving, and whether you made it or not, kishehem choizrim, yes, to unim bracha lachatchila. So gavaluk. So now actually, we have this new braisa that resurrected Rabbi Yechanan. Now there's a beautiful Rashbam over here, and the Rashbam asks, we are 7 lines under the Gemara in the Rashbam, towards the end of the medium-sized lines in the Rashbam, 1 line under the base of the Bach. He says, "V'lekalak shuye." Don't ask Adarabo. Why does the Braisa use an expression Lohoidiyacha koicha de Rabbi Yehuda? Why don't you use an expression Lohoidiyacha, the leniency of the Chachamim? That even if, no matter what food you ate, shinei makom is not a problem. Lashmein the bottom she'ein tzricham b'racha lachreim emukoimam lohidiyacha koichem derabanan demakilim. And the Rashbam says, and I'll tell you why telling you the koyach of the Chachamim should be a better option than telling you the koyach of Rabbi Yehuda, because there's a klal that koycha dehetera adif. Koycha dehetera adif. The Rashbam considers you not needing to make a new bracha prior a heter. The Marsha has a lot to say about that. So answers the Rashbam, the first widest line, Abol answers the Rashbam. Ein loy merkach. The ein koichan koyach v'chashivus im ein matzrichem levarech. Amazing. The Rashbam says that when it comes to Birchas HaNehenin, the one that's saying you don't need to make a bracha, that's not the koyach the hetera difa. You know why, guys? Because when it comes to brachas, whenever you have a doubt, other than Birchas HaMazon, that's midoraisa. By all other brachas, it's midrabanan. Because of brachas being midrabanan, when there's a suffix in brachas, what do we say? We say, don't make a bracha. When do we say koyach the hetera difa? When you have food. And if it's treif, you may not eat it. So the one that knows for sure it's kosher, that's the koyach. But when it comes to Birchas HaNehenin, the Rashbam says, beautiful. The Chachamim is not called koyach de teira difa. There's a question whether you have to say it or not. All they're saying is you don't have to make a bracha. The koyach of Rabbi Yehuda is greater. Because if you don't have to make a bracha, then making a bracha could be taking God's name in vain. Right, according to the Rambam, the most chamerdik opinion, that's called the bracha she'ein tzricha. The Rambam says that's a part of the violation of the 3rd commandment. Lo isisa shema Hashem alekecha lashav. Wow. So fakir. So the Braisa has to choose to tell you the koyach of Rabbi Yehuda that there are times that you do not have to make a bracha prior. And now going back into the Gemara,
Rabbi, can you just clarify one thing? According to the opinion of Rabbi Yechanan,
yes.
When do you have to? What's the situation if it's a bracha that requires?
According to Rabbi Yechanan, when a person is eating a meal, no matter what food they're eating, only if they decide to conclude their meal, and there's so many halachas about it, or if Rabbi Saimer Valenbenchen was said, there are many details of how the meal, when there is a ending of a meal, even though they didn't bench yet, then you have to make a new bracha rishona. But if the people did not consciously conclude their meal, just shinui makom is of no consequence.
Regardless of what kind of food, by nefashis or alamichia or
everything, correct. Because don't forget that Rab Chizda already holds that if you're eating a food, according to the Rashbam, that the man's a me'ein shalosh, shinui makom is not called a hefsek. Rabbi Yechanan is even one step more than that. Listen, guys, nowadays, a tshuva from Rabbi Vosner of blessed memory, the father, Shevet HaLevi, the fact is people are not that careful today. Especially when we learned yesterday that afilu mecheder lecheder. It's very, when people sit down to eat today, they don't leave the dining room, they don't go to the kitchen, they don't walk out for a moment. the oilam is very lenient. So he wrote a beautiful tshuva explaining how eating in those days was a much more serious of an affair. People would unbuckle their belt and they would sit down and they would recline. It was like in eating, getting up was a big thing. So says Rabbi Vos. Says today, people are barely sitting. People, he writes noch, he wrote this in the 80s, before the cell phones. If the phone rings in the kitchen, everyone gets the phone in the middle of the meal. It's people are not that bound to their makom as they were. This is just his head. It's better. We have to follow the dinim. He's just trying to be malamet schus. So therefore he says when people get up, at least if it's only mecheder lacheder, it's not exactly called a shini makom because we were never that much connected to our makom. Interesting approach. Anyways, back over here. Another braisa. Chaverim shahoyu mesubim lishtei yain. If chaverim got together to having a drinking session, and here again va'okru ragleim. Again, according to the Rashbam, it's clear because wine demands a al hagefen and v'chazru. No one is saying over here only if someone stayed behind. No such a statement is made. No matter when, even if everyone left, ein tzarich levarich. Okay, and I would like to say that we just again b'hashgacha pratis we learned we're up to kuf pei daled in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, but it's really kedai to learn the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch Simen Kuf Ayin Ches. It's called Ezer Devarim Kruyim Hefsek B'Seuda, and it's amazing now that we learned at least quickly the Gemara and the Rashbam, how you can see how this is the source and how you have a whole machlekes and gersois and you have machlekes and the Rishonim, and the Alter Rebbe B'chlal, he brings all of the different shittas together. So we began, it will be nice, like Lahasuka Shmaitz Aliyah the Hilcha said, the Alter Rebbe did all the hard work, and all of the poskim before him, but Pasha to read the end exactly how we paskin. No one should ever paskin from learning Gemara. Right. We are going back to one of the topics we learned about yesterday, and that is, I know that at the end we mentioned Shmuel and we mentioned Rav, Poides Mapu Mekadesh. We learned the Tosfos that says it's really in the Yerushalmi, it's a third opinion of Tanoim. We learned the Rashbam that Poides Mapu Mekadesh is based on the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, but in here in Bavli, the beginning of this is a machlekes between two, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda says, even though you began your meal before Shabbos, according to Rabbi Yehuda, even if you began your meal before the 9th hour of the day, don't forget Rabbi Yehuda's Bachlal Machmer, every yet of Shabbos. And we authenticated the second Braisa in the beginning of the 10th Pedic. And you can't even begin a meal, Samuch Min HaMincha, Erev Shabbos and Yontif. So you began your meal 2 p.m. And you slept all the way into Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to bench. Rabbi Yossi says you don't have to do anything. You finish your meal, and after finishing the meal, you make kiddush. That is what we learned. Now we're going to learn a very important nuance into that. Says the Gemara Tanach Rabbanon, Bnei Chabur Shoyim Masubin. Right? They got together Friday afternoon, and v'Kadash Aleim Hayoim, which means Shkia, because we are Noye Kedusha Shabbos as of Shkia, even though it's still Bein Hashmoshes. Says the first Tana, which is Rabbi Yehuda, who demands for us to be mafsik the meal. So when we said yesterday was, okay, you make your bench. Not exactly. First, meviim loikoi shel yayin and v'oimer olav kedusha sayoim. First, you have to make kiddush, and then you have to bench right away. Means it's not poides mapa mekadesh that after kiddush you continue the meal. Absolutely not. That's not Rabbi Yehuda. But it's not the way you would think. You have to finish the meal. So benching is connected to the meal, right? Kiddush is connected to the Shabbos. So it looks like you're going in the opposite seder. You have to go in this order, as we'll explain. According to that, we don't paskin this way. But that's Rabbi. First you make Kiddush, and then you make Birchas HaMazon. And these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Now let me just give you a pasha to Yesod over here. One is forbidden to drink, to eat, anything as of the onset of Shabbos until when you make Kiddush. So think about it. When did he say to stop eating? When the Kodash Aleim Hayoim, you eat until Shkia. The moment to Shkia, you're going to bench, right? When we bench, you have to bench ala kois. Alter Rebbe is very makbid. Even when only 3 people bench together, bench ala kois, make a zimun. When you bench ala kois, afterwards you have to drink koishal bracha. I'm asking you, how will you be allowed to drink koishal bracha for benching if you didn't make Kiddush? It's dafke because Rabbi Yehuda holds. that you can't be mamshech the meal, which means you have to bench, but it also means you have to make kiddush first. Now, after kiddush, you may not continue to eat. After kiddush, you have to bench. But you make kiddush in order to be able to drink the kais shel bracha over which you will bench. However, the last line in the Amid, Rabbi Yossi Omer, no. Like we said yesterday, there's a big discussion here. What does it mean, achetechshach? It's mashma from these words that you can only eat until it gets dark. That's not Rabbi Yossi. It's mashma from these words that he only allows you to eat during Bein Hashmashas. But when it's Laila Vadai, right, you can't eat anymore, but that's not the case. So many Rishonim, like the Ran, they had these words, but they clarified that the reason why Rabbi Yossi uses the words achetechshach is just to counter Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you have to stop by Shkia, and they say, no, you can eat after Shkia. But really, Rabbi Yossi holds you can eat even after Shetechshach. Actually, the Molchamois and other Rishonim have another girsa. Their girsa is that oichel v'hoilech mi Shetechshach. That's good. They eat even after it gets dark. Whichever is the girsa, the Rishonim understand Rabbi Yossi the way we explained it. So Rabbi Yehuda makes you stop by Shkia. Rabbi Yossi says you can eat during Bein Hashmashas and after it says Hu Beis Amid Beis. But when you finish Gamru, now you finish the meal. Now, ironically, what do you do first? So Kois Rishon Mevarach Olav Birchas Hamazon, first bench, even though it's Shabbos. And benching means you're going to make a Kois Shel Bracha after benching. Doesn't matter, because Rabbi Yossi L'Shitosei, since you began the meal before Shabbos, everything connected to the meal is allowed to be consumed, even though it's Shabbos. Even though after you bench, you make a new bracha prior for the wine. So you would think that the bracha that you make for the wine after benching is not part of the meal, because if it would have been part of the meal, then why would you have to make a bracha prior? But it's a kois connected to benching. The benching was for a meal. The meal, according to Rabbi Yossi, may be consumed even when it's dark. So Rabbi Yossi holds that you can drink the wine of the kois shel bracha even before you make kiddush. And only after you bench, the second line, the hasheni, and the second cup will be a cup over which you're going to make kedushas hayom kiddush.
Why do you have to?
Why do you make kiddush first?
Yeah.
I'll tell you why. Because the benching is connected to the meal. The meal is connected to the weekday. V'haraya, you were allowed to eat the meal before Kiddush. So meal is weekday. The benching is weekday. The koishel bracha is weekday, even though you make a new bracha prior. Kiddush, it's according to Rabbi Yossi, you follow the chronological order. Rabbi Yossi can afford to follow the chronological order because of his lenient opinion that says that since the meal began before Shabbos, you don't have to interrupt the meal. It's amazing. So now we have another detail. So Rabbi Yehuda, not only does he say to interrupt, you're going to have to bench, but Kiddush first. Rabbi Yehuda says Kiddush first.
So no Ritzei in benching?
What was that?
You wouldn't say Ritzei?
Oh. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you will not say Ritzei. Very good.
No, according to Rabbi Yossi, we're talking about.
According to Rabbi Yossi, if you ate a kazayas, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you do not say Ritzei. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to interrupt. You can't eat after Shkia. According to Rabbi Yossi, if you ate a kazayas after Shkia, then you say Ritzei.
Why? No, the whole thing we just learned is that you're dafka benching afterwards.
The whole thing we learned is Rabbi Yossi. According to Rabbi Yossi, you don't have to interrupt. I'm saying good. According to Rabbi Yossi, even though the Seder, the Birchas Hamazon is connected to the weekday meal, but you are allowed to eat on Shabbos. Guys, that's the
fine. But if it's a weekday benching connected to a weekday meal, so you wouldn't say Ritzei.
Okay. Let's for sure. That's a big topic over here. All I'm saying is, let me say it like this: that we paskin Periscope MERCAVA. Let's go with the Rashbam. Okay, we're not learning halacha, we're learning Gemara. The Rashbam says that Shmuel and Rav's Periscope MERCAVA is l'shitas Rabbi Yossi. He didn't have the Chachamim of the Yerushalmi. I'm telling you guys, the fact is that when now we make Kiddush, that's the difference, because we make Kiddush. No. Even, in other words, if according to the Rashbam, Rav and Shmuel, they're not going against Rabbi Yossi. I know that we make Kiddush, but the reason why we are allowed to eat without benching, no, I take it back. Okay, we say because we make Kiddush. What we do is not Negeya. So good, I don't know the answer to your question. I think that there's a debate about this here amongst the Rishonim.
But by and large, Rabbi, it seems like according to both opinions, you have to break the meal. Like you have to separate Choil from Shabbos, whereas Paris Mappa, it's a continuation.
Not according to Rabbi Yossi, you do nothing.
Well, you're still eating, but before you make Kiddush, you have to bench.
So what? Fakert. You have to bench and then you make Kiddush.
I'm just saying, it doesn't seem like anyone lets you just flow, from weekday into, what do you call it? We're middle of a meal. Stop, make some Kiddush, and then continue eating.
I don't know how you see this is not flowing according to Rabbi Yossi. You're having a meal, you eat until whenever you want to finish, you bench, and then after you bench, you make Kiddush. The only thing is you have to make Kiddush immediately. That was the Tosfos we learned, because Kiddush has to be B'Markam Su'udah. And the Kiddush will be that Kiddush B'Markam Su'udah doesn't have to mean Kiddush and then Su'udah. It can be Su'udah and then Kiddush. There's a...
So why won't you make the same Kiddush on the same cost of wine? Just do the benching and do the Kiddush in the same ogofen and drink the wine.
So guys, we learned in Nida that when we are in our mother wombs, we learn the whole Torah. So Shleima, the Malach didn't connect your mouth strong enough. Asks the Gemara, Va'amai, Shleima, why do we have to use two different cups? First days, when it comes to mitzvahs, we're trying to economize.
Do we apply the concept? Do we apply the concept of Safek Brachas Lahakil here at all?
Meaning, in what context?
If we say anyway Safek Brachas, what's the whole idea of Safek Brachas Lahakil? Why do we ever say?
That's a whole different din. Safek Brachas is you're touching on another topic that we didn't touch about yet. About do you have to make a new hagafen on the wine? The Gemara is not even talking about that here. We're going to speak about that in a moment. We're going to learn a Tosfos in a moment. And by the way, that kasha is also going to get to the Seder. We make Boide Pri Hagafen 4 times. Why do we make Boide Pri Hagafen 4 times? Right? Mele Birchas Hamazon, many Rishonim Taka learn here that you make the Boide Pri Hagafen on Kiddush, and then after the Magid, you don't have to make the Boide Pri Hagafen. You make a Boide Pri Hagafen after the benching and after the Hal. You don't have to. We don't follow. Tosfos holds you make 4 separate brachas.
But when we say Safek Brachas Lahakil, why do we say? What's the foundation?
The foundation
that we make?
The foundation is that almost all brachas are of rabbinic origin. And being that when it comes to rabbinic laws, we take Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. So normally we say Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula, but if you want to be Machmer, Gesund Hate. Once the halacha says you don't have to make a bracha, then you may not make a bracha. Okay, Tzamach, I'm saying that because many people erroneously think that all brachas is Safek Brachas L'Hakal, and that's not true. By benching, we don't say that, just to know that. The first 3 brachas, then the Alter Rebbe says, the 4th bracha is Mamash Midrabanan, even though the formulation of the words of the first 3 brachas is not from God, it came from Moshe, from Yeshua, from David and Shlomo, but the nekuda is that we have to touch upon, which we touch upon on the first 3 brachas is Midoraisa. The Ares and Bris and Torah and Yerushalayim, we have to speak about that. Once you start benching, you bench the whole thing. And by benching, we don't say Safek Brachas Lahakil. Okay, right, come back over here. So why don't you use 1 cup before brachas Tanach? Use 1 cup. Answers the Gemara. Amar Afuna Amar Apsheishes. Here is the klal. Ein oimnim shtei kedushas hakois echad. You don't perform 2 mitzvahs over 1 cup. Over 1 cup. Separate mitzvahs, separate cups. Look inside the Tosfos. She'ein oimnim. It's the 3rd Tosfos in the Amid. It says Tosfos yesh lahagen bechupa mitam zem sheloi loymar sheva brachos al koish. Al-Kois Birchas Hamazon. When he says chuppah, he doesn't mean under the chuppah. I want to say he means over here the during benching by the Sheva Brachas. Ela meviim kois achar ve'ein mevarchem al Hashem never pri hagafen. In other words, mamash, what we do, that whoever leads the benching holds 1 cup. Why can't you use the same cup? Because ein oimnim shtei kedush al kois echad. Then Tosfos wants to go on over here that maybe further on that Birchas Erusin and Birchas Nesuyin, that's also, you should not use the same cup. And Tosfos says that's not correct because Chada Milsi, No, it's under the chuppah. We'll see in the Gemara, whenever two mitzvahs have the same content, as we're going to go into the Sugi Kiddush and Havdalah, every Matzah Shabbos and Yom Tov, we don't hold two cups. Even though we're making Kiddush and Havdalah, that's called one concept. No problem. Erusin and Nesuyin is one concept. Those people who use two cups, there's a hefsek over there because we read the Ksuba. And by the way, that's a novelty. In other words, it's only from the times of Rashi onwards that they juxtaposed Kedushin to Nesuyin. Prior to that, in the times of Chazal, it would take them a year between one and the other. Rashi was the one that was Masakin, primarily not to have to spend money twice on two feasts, one for Eidos and one for Nesuyin, to remember that there are two different steps to be mafsik with the Ksuba. That has nothing to do with what's happening under the Chuppah rail. But anyways, it's good to remember, Tosfos says that's why today, when you bench by Sheva Brachas, you dafka should have two cups, because benching and Sheva Brachas are not the same thing.
Rabbi, Matzah Shabbos that goes into Yom Tov,
yes,
we do Havdalah and Kiddush on the same cup.
Just said that. So Gemara is going to say that. Right there. 1 second. So I said, in my come on, why don't you make two Kiddush on one cup? Bundling mitzvahs together, it's mamish an expression, lahavdul, 1,000 times the banks use it. They bundle mortgages, gives the appearance that it's burdensome. Like, I want to kill the two birds with one stone, God forbid. We're not trying to kill anything. We're enjoying every mitzvah has its own chashivos. You're telling me that you don't make two kedushas on one cup? For Hatanya, here we go, guys. Danny, what you just mentioned, hanichnas lebeisim b'matzah Shabbos. What do you do? What do you do? Now here, we're not speaking about Shabbos and Yom Tov. Stam Havdalah. What do you do? Mevarach ala yayin. You make, now this Seder that we are learning about, we learned in Brachas, and we're going to learn a lot, Pesachim Kuf Gimel. When we learn Brachas, we quoted the next daf. Okay, but let's follow the Seder of this Braisa. First, you make the Borei Pri Hagafen. Then you make the Ba'al HaMoed Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh on the torch. Then you make a Brach on the Psamim. And yeah, we're going to learn that even though that in Brachas, in the Mishnah, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel seem to subscribe to the same Shita, they argue regarding another which one comes first. But Neir is before Psamim, but on Pesachim, in the next daf, we will learn that there is a Machloikas Tanoim, what Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argued about. And we follow the ones who hold that Beis Hillel says Psamim comes before the fire, which is how we do it. We do Psamim, and then we do the Moed. But anyways, we're not going to focus on that Seder right now. V'acharkach, Omer Havdalah, right? Al Hakois. Now, Atkan, there's no kasha. So what? You're making wine and Havdalah is the same mitzvah. Now, here comes the Bamba kasha. The im ein lo yelo kois echad. Now, what's happening over here? We're going to clarify in a moment. In the Havamina, you're eating malava malka, and you don't have after malava malka, you're going to bench. So the im ein lo kois echad. If you only have one cup, then it's mashma here. Then Matzah Shabbos, you don't even make Havdalah first. Because if you're going to make Havdalah, you're going to drink up all your wine. Then you're going to have Sudas Malava Malka. Then you're going to have to bench. You won't have wine for benching. So Manichai la'achar hamazon, don't make Havdalah right away. Mashma, that you can eat right away. Umishal shalon kulon la'acharav. And what do you end up doing? And then on the same kois, you're going to make Havdalah and you're going to bench. That's the kasha. Says the Tosfos, before we go to the answer, when you learn the Braisa, we learned it the way we just said it right now. We're speaking about a person that's going to have Sudas Malava Malka, right? Sudas David Malka Meshicha. You know why it's called Sudas David HaMelech? Because David HaMelech, we learned this together in Shabbos. He was foretold by God that his day of passing will be on Shabbos. He wasn't told on which Shabbos, right? But he was, so every Matzah Shabbos when he was still alive, he made a Su'udah. That's the pshat. That's why it's called Sudas David Malka Mashiach. But coming back, Hikshad Rab Nissen, guys, you see, Tosfos Divrei Maschal Maniach Lachar Hamazon. Eich Yochel Koydem Havdalah. What are you saying? The pshat that a guy doesn't have wine, so therefore he can eat before he made Havdalah. Didn't we learn? Aren't we going to learn soon on Daf Kuf Zayin that Asar LaAdam Sheyitoim Klum Koydem Sheyavdil V'chulei V'chulei. Oh, so Tosfos gives one approach. That here we're speaking about someone who began Shalosh Shudas, guys. Verstehst? and they're eating into Matzah Shabbos. And yes, they will use the same cup for Birchas Hamazon and the same cup for Havdalah, which is, by the way, what we do. However, I just want to read the last 3 lines on Tosfos. That's a big chiddush, guys. We're not learning halacha; we're learning the Gemara and Tosfos. Ela yeshleimer the vadai bechinam ein loy leechol koydem Havdalah. Yes, if for no reason one may not eat anything before Havdalah. Avol kishe ein loy ela kois echad. Look inside Tosfos. Mutar lechol koydem Havdalah. You can have not just to eat. You can have a ganze malava malka, meaning washing suuda kedei lasois ala kois birchas hamazon. So learns Tosfos. Wow. Back inside the Gemara. So you see that you're making Havdalah and you're benching on the same kois. So the Gemara answers, Eloi, Shani, Amahat nisht, hat me nisht. This is not a biblical halacha. You don't make mitzvahs chavilos. You don't want to give the appearance that it's a burden. You don't have, then we can be lenient. I frag the Gemara, v'ha yomtiv shechal liyos achar Shabbos. Every Yom Tov that falls on a Matzah Shabbos, the Islay. Now, the Islay means based on the presumption that people prepare lavish meals, food, and wine for Yom Tov. It's a big doichik to say that people won't have any wine for Yom Tov. Yom Tov is mamash, right? The celebration of Yom Tov is to eat and to drink. So we're presuming that the Islay, nevertheless, as we'll learn a lot in a moment, the whole smorgasbord of opinions of what is said first. According to everyone, it's made on one cup. And according to Rav, Yakna. Yakna is Yayin, Boyre Priyagofen, Kiddush, right? Mekadosh, Yisrael V'Hazmanim. Neid is Boyre Mehoire Ha'esh. And then the Hay stands for Havdalah. Yayin Kiddush and Havdalah. So the first answer of the Gemara is, why doesn't it say Zman? What happened to the Shechiyanu? You know why it doesn't say Zman? Because we're not speaking about the first day of Yom Tov. We're speaking about Shvi Shal Pesach. People prepare a lot of food for Yom Tov, but you know what? By the time Shvi Shal Pesach comes around, you ran out of wine. That's a Gavaldika practice. So they answered, Midoli Omar Zman. Now the truth is, we're going to see, God willing, in the next year. If we'll have time, we'll get to it today. Yak Nehaz Zman. Shechayanu is the last one. But in this statement of Yakna, since he didn't say Zman Michlal, the Shvi Shal Pesach Askinon. The Chol Mada Avalei, Achalei V'Leislei. By Shvi Shal Pesach, there's no food left over. There's no wine left over. Says the Gemara, no. For Hayom Tov Rishon, the Islay, again, the presumption is that people have food. They prepare for Yom Tov, food and wine. And V'Amar Abaya, regarding Zman, Abaya said it is Yak Zina, Yayin Kiddush Zman Neir Havdalah. Rava holds that the Seder is Yak Nehaz, Yain Kiddush, Neir, Havdalah, Zman. So we're back to the Kasha, Danny, that's your question. So answers the Gemara, Elo, Havdalah v'Kiddush, Chada Milsihi. That was the Tosfos. Eidusin and Nesuin is Chada Milsihi. By the way, we fill up the cup a little bit. We, Lubavitch, under the chuppah, we use the same cup for Eidusin, the same cup for Nesuin. We actually break that cup later. Elama, that after Birchas Eidusin, even though the Rav who's Musadeh Kedushin makes the brachos, not to a shame Hassanim that can't pronounce, it's a bracha that they're not familiar with. They might not be able to read properly and get ashamed, but the Hassanim Kala drink a little bit. So the cup has to be refilled. As we learned to Sugya, I think it was in brachas, to have an overflowing cup when it comes to all koshel brachas. But we use the same cup, Chada Milsi. Here, Kiddush and Havdalah is Chada Milsi. Birchas Hamazon and Kiddush. No, that's going back to the top. When Rabbi Yossi says, first make Birchas Hamazon and take another cup and fill it up and make Kiddush Hayoim, because Birchas Hamazon and Kiddush is Trei Milaninu. How beautiful is that? Remember, guys, the end of Lifnei Eideim, the end of the first Perek of Avodah Zarah. Daf Yutes, Daf Chaf, I think it was on Daf Chaf, we have the Brais of Rav Pinchas Ben Yair, right? The 10 steps. Yeah. So just to say that Kedusha, right, Perishus is Havdalah, separation. Now he said Perishus, Tahara, Chasidis, Anova, Yiras Chet, Kedusha, Ruach HaKodesh, and Tchias HaMesim. Yeah, these steps. It wasn't Kedusha to Havdalah to Kedusha, but the concept, like we said, the Kedusha is connected to one's Gevura. When we separate ourselves, when we remove ourselves, Hiskafia brings about Kedusha. Now, we like I said, Kiddush Mamakam Seuda. It's not to completely remove ourselves. No, be in the world and be not of the world. We are from God, but we are sent here on a mission, but we have to be a little bit parush. We have to stand a tefach higher than the world as we are in the world in order to bring Kedusha both in ourselves and in the entirety of the world. Okay, so now that we clarified that, let's at least begin. We have another couple of minutes, and let's go through all of the different orders of what happens when Yom Tov falls on Motzei Shabbos. So you have to make Kiddush, you have to make Havdalah. Now each one, there's so many opinions, each one has a big logic behind it. So this is something, we can go slow, but it's kedai to learn the Gemara and the Rashbam. So let's begin. I want you to first find the Shita of Rav. Rav is 50 lines before the bottom of the Amid in the Rashbam. Let's keep a finger the whole time in the Rashbam. Now let's go to the Gemara. 2 dots. Go for we learned above that Yom Tov Shchali is Acher Shabbos. When Yom Tov falls on Motzei Shabbos, which means you have to both make Kiddush for Yom Tov and you have to make Havdalah for Shabbos. So Rav Amar that the Seder is Yakna. Now we're not mentioning Zman like we mentioned because if a Shvir Shal Pesach there is no Zman. What's Yakna? Yayin Kiddush Ner Havdalah. Why says the Rashbam? Right? Sviralei. First of all, Kedushas Hayoim Adifam Havdalah. Making Kiddush is better than Havdalah. Why? Because it's b'chlal better. You know, is it better for you to walk away from holiness or for you to welcome holiness? Welcome holiness. Number 2, inami, the chimavdol bereisha, if you make Havdalah first, then mechaze, you give the appearance, the hava le kedusha seyem kamasui. It looks like that you're running away from restrictions. Right away, the first moment in every shul, the moment it's this man, people are itching to daven ma'ariv. That's not a good thing. Okay. And therefore, so koydem kol, you make Kiddush first. Now, to make Kiddush, Rashbam continues, Lefikach yayin koydem lekiddush. Why? Like Beis Hillel in Brachas, we had that machlokes every Kiddush, every Friday night. What do you say first, the Mekadosh Shabbos or the wine? So Beis Hillel holds yayin the way we do it. And then Mekadosh Shabbos. Why? Because of the klal, that which is frequent comes first. Toder v'she'ena toder koydem. Now, after Kiddush, says the Rashbam, comes Ner. Why Ner and then Havdalah? Because every Havdalah, what comes first? First the Ner and then the Havdalah. Now hold on, my friends. What happened? What happened with Psamim? What happened with Psamim? Let's look inside the second to last Tosfos. But guys, keep your finger on the Rashbam. Rav Omer Yakna, Uma she'ein masker Psamim, Perush Rashbam, the Tam Psamim Mishum Ibut Neshama Yisera. Right? Every Shabbos, we are connected to a deeper level of our soul. And when that goes away, Motzei Shabbos, we are sad and we smell Psamim to console Lo Hashiv Es HaNefesh. Says the Rashbam, that Tosfos is quoting, and on Yom Tov, we also have an Neshama Yisera. The guys, Tosfos in Beitza, Daf Lamed Gimel writes explicitly that there is no Neshama Yisera on Yom Tov. And these two Tosfos are connected. Asks Tosfos V'kasha. If indeed on Yom Tov you have a Neshama Yisera, let me ask you, why don't you make Psamim every Motzei Yom Tov? V'kasha didn't come to Motzei Yom Tov. Amay lo tekinu Psamim. Lachein's type says Tosfos that no, that under the Neshama Yisera, at least on the level that we have it on Shabbos, is not that great on Yom Tov. However, neither the Yom Tov like a Neshama Yisera, v'hache ein masker Psamim. You know why? Mishum simchas Yom Tov. Ve'achila, v'shesiya. Wow. That is just like Psamim. Now it's amazing. It's not just eating and drinking, because that of our, what we call the 5 senses, the one that touches the soul more than all the others is scent. And we have to be meshiv the nefesh. That means the chelik of the neshama that remains behind is saddened that it lost its connection to its deeper part, to its higher part, to its neshama yeseda, to the level of chaya and yechida, as we know in Chassidus. However, the simcha of Yom Tov, the Tamei HaMenhagim quotes the Avudram that has all this based on the Tosfos. He writes the words that oineg Yom Tov, the oineg of Yom Tov, and the fact that we eat and we drink. It's very not just eating and drinking. If not every Motzei Shabbos you eat and drink. No, it's something that has to touch your soul. What touches your soul? A good fragrance and joy. And the ruchniisdike pleasure from the fact that it's Yom Tov. That is in the place of Psamim. But since Yom Tov himself doesn't have a neshama yiseda l'toisves, that's why Motzei Yom Tov you don't make Psamim, Gavaldik, Let's go back in the Gemara. Shmuel Amar, another opinion, that it's Yan Hak. Now, why Yan Hak? Says the Rashbam, 11 lines before the bottom of the Amit. Shmuel Sfirale, Havdalah has to come before Kiddush. Why? So says the Rashbam, as the Gemara is going to say in the beginning of Kuf Gimel. And the Gemara brings a mashal of Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, the great debater. That he says, he says, imagine if you have in your house a king that's leaving, and then you have a iparkois, you have a duke, or some other nobleman, but not the king, that's coming. Who do you give honor to first? First, Melavan Hamelach HaShabbos. First, you accompany the king, and that is done by Lahavdil, and then Yoitzin Lakrasi Parkois, which is Lakras Yontav Lakatre. So Koidem Kol, in principle, he says Havdalah has to come before Kiddush. Then the Rashbam goes on to explain all the details. Right, Yayin has to come first. Neir is always done before Havdalah. Bachlal by Havdalah, how do you make Havdalah? Yayin, Neir, Havdalah. Again, Psamim we're not doing because it's entering Yontif. You have Simchas Yontif. You have Oinig Yontif. Or according to the Rashbam, you have a neshama, you say that Bachlal, the neshama doesn't have to be consoled. Let's go one more. Let's Chaparayim, have another few minutes. Daf Kuf Gimel. Rabbi holds another Shita. Yahanak. What's Yahanak? Give a cook in Rashbam. Sfirale, first of all, like this. Rabbi holds like Rav, that what? The mashvei ma'oid that the Rav puts the ma'oid between Kiddush and Havdalah. Not why she'einachem be'einav shel Rabba lismayich Havdalah lekiddush. Because according to what Shmuel says, you went one into the other. Havdalah Kiddush. No, don't do that. Because one weakens the other. Taka. The Kiddush, right? HaKiddush oiseu kodesh chamur. Kiddush is bringing in Kedusha. Havdalah is removing Kedusha. Don't put two things that are fighting each other. However, why do you begin with wine? Why do you begin with wine? Why are you not mafsikit, say Neir, Havdalah, Yayin, and Kiddush? No, he says Yayin, Havdalah, Neir, and Kiddush. Neo Yayin Beroish. Why? Because the Tadr Koidem. Beautiful. So if Tadr v'she'ena Tadr is Koidem, every time you have to make a bracha Yayin before you have one. Yayin comes first. You have to be mafsik between Havdalah and Kiddush. So then you put the Neir in between. And Rabbi holds like Shmuel, that Havdalah has to come first, because first you're Malava the Melech, and then you greet the Iparkois. Next Shita. Levi holds Keniya. Vasas does Keniya. Look inside the Rashbam, 16 lines from the top of the Rashbam. He holds the Kiddush Koidem Havdalah like Rav, because if you're going to first make Havdalah, it looks like you want to get rid of holiness. No, first you make, not Havdalah, first you make Kiddush. Now, why does he not put Yain Bereisha? Lefi says the Rashbam. If you're going to begin with Yain, the first one will be Yain and the last one will be Havdalah. You're separating the wine and the Havdalah too much. And unlike Kiddush, that Kiddush could be done if you don't have wine ala pas. So Kiddush, amazing. Neir, look at the Seder. Yayin and Havdalah. The Rabbanan hold Kina. Let's look inside the Rashbam. This is the second to last narrow line in the Rashbam. Sfira Lekerav. First of all, the Chachamim hold that Kiddush comes before Havdalah. And he also holds that V'roitza Nami Lismoich Yayin LaHavdalah. Tvei Mekiddush. So therefore, Kiddush Bereisha. Then you follow the Seder of Havdalah. Beautiful. How do you make Havdalah every Motzei Shabbos? Take out Pesamim. Yayin, Neir, Havdalah. Gavaldik. Kiddush first. It's not a Masui. Yayin. This like a second line of the Gemara. Marbre de Ravina Amar Nikia. Nikia, look inside the Rashbam, 3 lines under the Rashbam. Kiddush Koidem LaHavdalah Kirav. V'yayin Nami Roitza Lismech LaHavdalah K'moshe Perashti. So therefore, the only option is Nikia. Gavaldik. And here you also have the separation between Kiddush and Havdalah. Marta Amar Mishmei de Rabbi Shua. Nihak. Now Nihak says the Rashbam, Taimam Kedem Farish Lekamim. Havdalah comes before Kiddush. But Neir has to come first. Why? Why begin with Neir? Lefi sheroitza liten yayin samuch lahavdalah ula Kiddush. Amazing. So get the Neir, so to say, out of the way. Begin with Neir, and Taka Havdalah comes before Kiddush, but at least the Yain is as close as you could before Kiddush. Okay, Chavra, we'll stop over here. I just want to say, Al Pidrush, all of these abbreviations have a soid in them. And the Yak Nahaz, according to us, maybe is Yikoin with a kuf. A kan is a nest. A kan is a nest, right? Yikoin means that when will God finally nest in this world is Hazayin in the Doir Hashvi, like the Rebbe says, that we are the ones that are bringing Mashiach back. That's the Yak Nahaz, as we'll continue with Hashem's help. Ha.
Thank you.
I'm sitting here, I can say whatever.